Hello, everyone. Today we'd be discussing hypothesis. Now, while discussing hypothesis, I would initially want to tell you what a hypothesis is. I'd want to walk you through the three different type of hypotheses that are part of our syllabus. And then I'd want to show you the type of questions that we've had on hypothesis in the past in our CIs. How important is hypothesis? I think it's pretty essential that you know your research methodology well, especially before you sit for your paper two. We have had a 1 mark question, we've had 2 mark questions, we've had 3 mark questions, and we've had a 6 mark question on hypothesis as well. So before we begin, or as we begin, number one, what is a hypothesis? A hypothesis is a testable statement, any statement that you could test. It is an educated guess that provides a framework for understanding and predicting outcomes. So an educated guess, it's a prediction, right? Now, moving on, there are three different type of hypotheses that are a part of our syllabus. To begin with, we have one-tailed hypothesis. Number two, we have two-tailed hypothesis. Number three, we have null hypothesis. Now, I'd like to explain you what a null hypothesis is, and then I tell you why why the one-tailed hypothesis and the two-tailed hypothesis are referred to as alternative hypothesis. A null hypothesis, see, a statement, a predictable statement, as we just discussed, a predictable statement through which you're nullifying, right? You are nullifying the relationship between two variables, right? This is what you need to keep in mind before we move ahead. Now, uh, and an alternative hypothesis, when we use the word alternative hypothesis are the alternative to a null hypothesis, right? An alternative to a null hypothesis, through a null hypothesis, you're nullifying the relationship, right? You're rejecting the relationship between two variables. However, as we speak about alternative hypothesis, we have two different type of alternative hypothesis. To begin with, we have one-tailed hypothesis, which is also referred to as directional hypothesis. And number two, we have the two-tailed hypothesis, which is also referred to as the non-directional hypothesis. Now, a one-tailed hypothesis, let's use an example. I'd like to use an example to help you understand this better. If I talk about two different variables, let's just say if we're talking about two different variables and they are the amount of light in a classroom, the amount of light in a classroom, and number two, the level of concentration students have. Now, these two examples that I'm using over here, the amount of light in a classroom and the level of concentration, right? So we're talking about two different variables. We try to figure out what sort of relationship could they have. So if it is a directional hypothesis, which is also referred to as a one-tailed hypothesis, right? We could say an increase. I'm just trying to give you an example over here. We could say an increase in the amount of light in the classroom will increase the level of concentration of students. So what I'm doing over here is I'm providing a direction. I'm trying to explain that yes, light affects concentration, right? So I'm talking about light having a change on the concentration level of students, but at the same time, I'm further elaborating on it by showing the direction of that change. When I say an increase in the amount of light in the classroom would result in an increase in the level of concentration that students have. So this would be an example of a one-tailed hypothesis. This could also be a decrease in the amount of light in the classroom would result in a decrease in the concentration level of students. So I'm talking about there being a change, and I'm further elaborating on the direction that change would have. So this is an example of one-tailed hypothesis. On the other hand, if I talk about a two-tailed hypothesis, a two-tailed hypothesis is when you do show that there would be a change, but you're not sure what direction that would that change be in, right? A two-tailed hypothesis, see, as the name suggests, a two-tailed hypothesis, also referred to as a non-directional hypothesis. What if I say an amount of light or the amount of light in a classroom would affect the concentration level of students, right? Now, listen to me carefully. The amount of light in a classroom would affect the concentration level of students. I'm talking about the amount of light in classroom affecting the concentration level of students, but I'm not elaborating on the direction this effect would have. I'm not elaborating, I'm not further specifying that the increase in light would increase the concentration level or decrease the concentration level. I'll say it for the third time. If I say the amount of light in a classroom would affect the concentration level of students, this is an example of a two-tailed hypothesis, also referred to as a non-directional hypothesis. The third hypothesis that we need to know over here is a null hypothesis that I spoke about right at the beginning. An example of null hypothesis would be the amount of light in a classroom would not affect the concentration level of students, or there's no relationship between the amount of light in the classroom and the concentration level of students. You're nullifying the relationship between them. Or you could further say, if there's any change, the change would be too trivial or too small. Or you could even say, if there's any change, the change would be mere coincidental change, right? So these are the basics that you all need to understand before we proceed. So you need to know what a one-tailed hypothesis is. You need to know what a two-tailed hypothesis is. And you also need to know what a null hypothesis is. Let me use these examples over here so that you understand what sort of questions you've had back in the past. And there's always a possibility of you having questions of a similar nature. Now, questions like these, like I had said earlier, question number 7, 8, and 9, they are typically from novel situations. Let's walk ourselves through this. Penny is using cats and parrots in her experiment. Penny is using cats and parrots in her experiment. Penny houses each animal alone and only gives them the daily food every evening. Her independent variable is the species. She thinks that parrots will share food because they are social animals. She thinks that parrots will share food because they're social animals, whereas cats live on their own. To test this, two animals of the same species are put together with a small bowl of food every afternoon. You might as well pause it here and read through this again if required. Write an operationalized non-directional or a two-tailed hypothesis for Penny's experiment. Now, an operationalized, again, what does the word operationalization over here mean? Operationalization is when you're defining a variable, when you're setting up a criteria, or when you're defining a variable, or when you're saying this is what it means when we talk about there being, in this case, a change. So write an operationalized non-directional hypothesis for Penny's experiment. Let's read through the marking scheme. 2 marks for a fully operationalized non-directional hypothesis, correctly using cats and parrots and saying how food sharing will be measured. Now see, over here, the question requires us to write a non-directional hypothesis. I've seen many students getting confused over here. You need to remind yourselves of what a non-directional hypothesis is before you even start writing this. Remember, a non-directional hypothesis is when you say there is one variable affecting another variable, but you're not specifying in what direction the change would be. So examples of this would be, number 1, cats and parrots will differ in the time they spend sharing food. Now, saying they would differ in the time they spend sharing food, you're not specifying which animal would be sharing more or which animal would be sharing less. Another example over here is there will be a difference in the numbers of pieces of food shared between the cats and parrots. Now, there would be a difference in the number of pieces of food shared. Now, this is an example of operationalization. Even though I'm making this video to help you understand a hypothesis, is just because this came midway, you might as well understand operationalization too. So there will be a difference in the number of pieces of food shared between cats and parrots. In that case, what would be the operationalization part for the first example? See, cats and parrots will differ in the time. This is when you're operationalizing, right, the variable. Moving on. The third example, where the examiner says if a student writes something like this, the student would receive 1 mark. There would be a difference in food sharing between cats and dogs. Not cats and dogs, cats and parrots. So the fourth one, there will be a difference in helpfulness between cats and parrots. The fifth one, there will be a difference for food sharing between animals and species. If you talk about the difference between these 3 and these 2, the differences in terms of operationalization. Over here, this is the operationalization part, and in the second one, this is operationalization part. I hope you've understood this. Moving on to the next example that we have over here. Again, this 6-mark question. 6-mark question that reads, describe different types of hypotheses in research using an example. Now, two things why I have chosen this question. One, I've chosen this question because I'd want you all to know that, see, we do get 6 mark questions on this as well. So it would be great if you walked yourself through all of these examples and then maybe practice a question or two as well, so that there's no chance of you missing on any mark. The second reason, see, the word over here, if you have a look at the spelling, this is hypotheses. What is hypotheses? Hypothesis is singular, hypotheses is plural. As simple as it could be. Now, taking this ahead, describe different types of hypotheses in research using any examples. Now, many students end up asking, so what does it mean when they say any examples? Any example means any example from the core studies you've had, or any example that you make up on your own too. They both work. Now, if for the 6 mark, for this particular 6 mark question, if we may have a look, you get 1 mark for a basic definition of each type of hypothesis. And at max, you could get 4 marks by merely writing definitions. Maximum 5 further marks for detail or explanation. Now, hypotheses are testable statements. They're based on a research question or an aim. Now, the alternative hypothesis is the one being tested in a study. Remember, non-directional hypothesis and directional hypothesis, they're both examples of an alternative hypothesis. The alternative hypothesis predicts a difference in an experiment, or an alternative hypothesis predicts a relationship in a correlation. Now, these hypotheses, you need to know them. You need to know what they are and how to use them in an experiment or in a correlational study as well. Taking it ahead, a two-tailed hypothesis, a two-tailed or a non-directional hypothesis predicts just a difference. There's a relationship. If I take you back to the example that I was giving you a couple of minutes earlier, what I said was, what is the example? Yeah, the relationship between light and concentration. A change in the amount of light in a classroom would change or would affect the concentration level of students. Or you could say an increase in the amount of light in the classroom would affect the concentration levels of students. I'm talking about there being an effect. I'm not specifying what sort of an effect would it be. So taking this ahead, a two-tailed hypothesis or a non-directional hypothesis predicts just a difference or relationship. A one-tailed or directional hypothesis is an example in an experiment predicts which level of the IV will be better. However, a one-tailed or directional hypothesis in a correlation predicts whether the correlation will be positive or negative. Again, this is an example of an experiment. This is an example of a correlation. Understand them both. Taking it ahead, the null hypothesis is one that is used in a statistical testing. A null hypothesis predicts that there will be no difference or correlation, or that any difference or correlation is merely due to chance. You could say it's merely due to chance, or this difference is there and this difference exists merely on the basis of coincidence too. Now, taking this ahead, an example. Dementon-Kleitman predicted a directional hypothesis that more dreams would occur in REM sleep than NREM sleep. More dreams would there would be more dream recalls, to be more specific. Another example, a suitable null hypothesis would have been there's no difference in the amount of dream recall from REM and NREM sleep. Taking it ahead, Baron-Cohen predicted a directional hypothesis of a negative correlation between AQ and ICE test of a negative correlation, that is, one increases, another decreases, or alternatively, one decreases, another one increases. Moving on to the fourth example, a suitable null hypothesis would have been any correlation between AQ and ICE test resultant due to chance. Now, this is where you could take help from to be able to write an answer to a 6-mark question. Yes, write at least 6 points. That includes the definitions that should be comprehensive, that should be detailed enough, along with examples. Of course, for a 6-mark question, you get 12 lines, and that should be enough for you to provide what the examiner requires from you. Moving on real quick, why is it that I chose this question? I chose this question now again, so that you know that you could get questions on hypothesis linked to particular course studies as well. The first question that I had chosen over here, this one, the one from Penny, this was from a novel situation. This one, just to show you that, yes, you need to take this seriously. And this one to show you that we get questions that are linked to core studies as well. Remember, especially question number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in paper 2, there's a possibility that you might as well be tested on your grip on research methodology in line with the core studies that you've already prepared for paper 1. Now, Dement and Kleitman, sleep and dreams, compared dream duration estimates for 5 minutes and 15 minutes REM period. Write a null hypothesis for this part of the study. Now, if you write down a muddled experimental or null hypothesis, you get 1 mark. Muddled is not something that's not clear. See, I have mentioned this earlier as well. I've seen this happening a lot of times. If a student doesn't know it, if a student isn't sure about something, they try, or they feel at least that they might as well try to write down something that's not clear and bluff and get their marks. It doesn't always work like that. So it's better that you write whatever you're writing in a clear manner. Clear expression always helps. You get a 2 mark. You get 2 marks for a clear experimental hypothesis, or like, so for a clear experimental null hypothesis. The hypothesis does not have to be operationalized for 2 marks. Again, taking this ahead. It's a 2 mark question. Any difference between estimates of dream duration for different lengths, any difference between estimates of dream duration for different length REM periods is due to chance. You write this, you'd be able to score 2 marks. There are other examples over here as well. You might as well pause this video and read through them to know how you'd be getting 2 marks, how you'd get a single mark, or how you'd not get a mark at all. It's pretty important that you read through all of them, because there are so many students, they write answers, and when they do not receive full marks, they seem to not like it, of course, and they seem to be confused as to why they haven't had full marks. You need to understand the requirements of the question, and that is another reason why I'm doing these questions with you. Another question here, real quick, question number 7 from a novel situation. Given is testing the hypothesis that people are more likely to drop rubbish on the ground when there is already rubbish on the ground. He's conducting a field experiment in a quiet street. His independent variable is whether the street already has rubbish on the ground or not. Given's dependent variable is whether people drop a leaflet given to them by a stooge onto the ground or not. You pause this over here and read this. Read these 6 lines at least twice. Yeah, if you're done reading, now let's have a look at the question. The question reads, state the type of hypothesis given is testing, including a reason for your answer. See, you've been put through a situation, and now you've been asked to identify the type of hypothesis that is being used over here. State the type of hypothesis given is testing, include a reason for your answer. Now, many students, they end up just identifying this. Don't do that. Read the question thoroughly. It's a 2 mark question, right? So you should include a reason for your answer as well. If we have a look at the marking criteria, you get 1 mark for identifying the type of hypothesis, and you get 1 mark for the reason. Even if name is incorrect, this may or may not be linked. So the answer over here would be directional hypothesis or one-tail hypothesis, 1 mark. Because he's saying that, because he's saying the way the IV will affect the DV, not just that there will be a difference, you'd get 1 mark. As Gavin says, rubbish will make people litter more, not just that, it will have an effect on littering, 1 mark. So you know what sort of an hypothesis is, and you by now should know how you'd receive a 2 on 2 on this. Again, another question that is linked to a core study. Milgram conducted many studies. One investigated whether the prestigious location, Yale University, affected obedience. He used the experimental method to compare the obedience in the original study at the university with the same study carried out in an old office block. So let me read through the last line again. He used the experimental method to compare the obedience in the original study at the university with the same study compared in an old office block. Write an operationalized directional hypothesis for this experiment. Again, there will be more obedience in the study at Yale than in the rundown office. More participants will reach 300 volts, 450 volts in the study at the Yale University than in the office. Now, in the first one, the student would receive 1 mark. In the second one, 2 marks. Do you know the difference? Why? The difference is in terms of operationalization. See, the examiner asked you to write an operationalized directional hypothesis. This is when you've operationalized it. right? Know this, understand this, and try not making the mistakes that you have been in the past. Another example, write a null hypothesis for this experiment. A 1 mark question, there will be no difference in obedience between Yale and the office, or any difference in obedience between Yale and office is due to chance, or any difference in obedience between the two locations is due to chance. The next question over here, Carol. Carol is interested in theory of mind. She's comparing adults in caring jobs such as nursing with adults in non-caring jobs that have less contact with the public. Carol believes that adults in caring jobs will score higher on the ICE test than those in the non-caring job. Again, write a null hypothesis for this. Yeah, so you get 1 mark for a null hypothesis, whether operationalized or not. It has to be a null hypothesis, though. An example of how you could score 1 mark, there will be no difference between ICE test scores for caring job adults and non-caring job adults. You might as well pause this and read through the other examples. The next question over here, real quick, a hypothesis and a study about ways to reduce phobia states positive reinforcement will reduce phobic reactions more than imagery exposure. In this, is this a directional one-tailed hypothesis or non-directional two-tailed hypothesis? Include a reason. So one, you need to write down if it is a one-directional, sorry, if it is a directional hypothesis or non-directional hypothesis, and then you're expected to include a reason for your answer as well. So this could be a 2-mark question as well, but over here in the specific question, the examiner thought of just allotting 1 mark to this. Again, write a null hypothesis for this. Again, worth 1 mark. You get 1 mark for null hypothesis with independent variable and dependent variable mentioned over there. This could be an example. So moving on real quick, a hypothesis in a study states recall will be better after a short delay than after a long delay. Is this a directional one-tailed hypothesis, or yeah, include a reason for your answer? This is pretty similar to the one that we had earlier as well. Moving on to another question, Sonia is conducting a study using drivers queuing in traffic. Her hypothesis is there will be a positive correlation between frustration and anger in drivers. Sonia measured anger by asking each driver to rate how angry they feel on a rating scale from 0, that is calm, to 5, that is very angry. Write a null hypothesis for Sonia's study. Again, a 1-mark question. So these have been a couple of questions. There's another one that I have queued up over here. I don't want this video to be super long, so I'm trying to just quickly walk you through this. You might as well pause this. By now you would know what to do and what not to do to be able to score full marks. Again, another one. I think I've piled up loads over here. You might as well just read through this and understand what to do, what not to do to be able to score full marks. I hope this has been helpful. Know your research methods well. If you do not know, walk yourself through the syllabus for research methods. Yes, I'm sure many of you feel you know the syllabus. You need to read through it once. Trust me when I say this, you need to read through it once. If you feel lazy, there's this video that I've put up on this. Might as well quickly go through that video so that you're not missing on anything. I hope this has helped. Take good care of yourselves. Thank you.